Hello, everyone. I'm Garrett Womble with PRAXIS3, and thank you for joining. Today's discussion will be led by PRAXIS3 Principal David Hamilton. Please feel free to submit any questions using the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to address those at the end of the discussion. We're very excited to be joined by John Reagan and Robert Hughes with Urban Realty Partners to discuss potential mixed-use trends emerging from the current pandemic. John has been in the development business for over 20 years and has an architectural background. His architectural practice focused on a variety of sectors, including historical renovations, housing, and hospitality. He and Robert are both graduates of Georgia Tech. Robert has been with the Urban Realty Partners for over 15 years and is involved in all phases of their projects, including underwriting, feasibility analysis, site selection, financing, and development management. David Hamilton is with PRAXIS3, and he has been practicing architecture for over 30 years. He serves on the board of the Freedom Park Conservancy, the Atlanta Architecture and Design Center, the Beltline Design Review Committee, and is involved with the Central Atlanta Progress Organization. With those introductions, I'll turn it over to David to get us started.
Thank you, Garrett. Appreciate that. So I would like to just thank Robert and John again for being with us here today. We've been working with Urban Realty Partners for a number of years and had some successful projects together. And I think there probably not no one else I would rather be doing this with. They have an incredible knowledge of mixed use, particularly residential development in Atlanta and elsewhere. And I think they'll have some pretty good things to say. The future, of course, is a notoriously hard to predict thing. After all, where are our flying cars, our moon bases, and our room-sized computers that were predicted really not that long ago? This particular image you see on the screen now is a great image from the 1939 World's Fair, City of Tomorrow attraction. Amazingly, this is, for better or worse, one of the better, more accurate predictions. It was actually sponsored by General Motors. It was a view of the world in the distant time of 1960. It featured a lot of freeways, tall buildings, and suburbs, which is a lot like the world of 1960. I think GM sponsorship had a lot to do with that. It was the world they really wanted to see, and it's the world we got. Today, though, we're going to talk about after COVID-19. We're going to talk about its impact on the mixed-use world, specifically the residential mixed-use world, apartment buildings. We're going to start at a pretty high level with a few predictions, a few things that folks have been talking about in the last 5 months. Some of them, I think, true, some maybe not so true, and most maybe somewhere in between. Of course, we won't know until this is hopefully one day over with. Just to go through these briefly and get the panelists' opinions about these. First one is the idea that COVID-19 spells the end of the urban renaissance and a return to the suburbs. I think this one has been bandied about a lot. I personally don't think this is one of the ones that will turn out to be particularly accurate, because I think the amenities of the city are more than just the sum of the parts. John, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the urban renaissance will continue. Frankly, unabated. There has been a little bit of movement to the burbs, but I think if any effect of the COVID-19 shows its head, it will be that the cities have tended to actually deal with the pandemic better than the less developed areas. So I don't think that there's going to be any coming off of that, and I think that the reasons that people pick urban areas to live in, the excitement, the convenience, will only make it more attractive.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think, I even think there's a bit of a myth that a suburb would be safer than a city. I think there's more room for social distancing maybe in the suburbs, but things aren't as convenient. You don't have to hop in your car to go everywhere. And things like, medical facilities, should you need them, are actually much more convenient and much more readily available in the city. So I think there's a little bit of sort of suburban myth making going on there. So I would agree with that. Second point, the virus will drive businesses to telecommuting and drive down the need for office space. I think there's certainly a little bit of truth to that, maybe in some businesses more than others. I know in our office, We have found that we work better than we thought was possible, all working remotely. Then again, things like design require collaboration. So I think the office will not disappear. And I think we've learned both the promise and the limitations of working from home.
Well, I think the reality is that the gross amount of office space won't change because people will still be working somewhere. And so it may shift in terms of its location. Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I really do think that you may see a trend of scaling down the size, but people are going to keep their offices. I think, as we've discussed, we've all spent way too much time at our dining tables to completely move away from a separate office. So I agree with you.
Yeah, thanks. Third thing on this list is indoor recreational activities, loosely call that, like spectator sports, art exhibits, or concerts, will be quite different in the future than they were pre-COVID.
This is a tough one. We all love our sports and our concerts, so I think we will try to get back to those to the normalcy as soon as we can. I think that it will be a slow movement with less density in terms of number of people at concerts or sporting events, but I think people are going to try to get back to what it was as soon as they can.
Yeah. And I think that as soon as we have, the miracle of a vaccine or an effective treatment, I think people's memories are a little bit short about this. Although I think the reemphasis on hygiene is maybe something that will last for a while. I know, in looking at the 1918 pandemic, it was pretty much forgotten, and after 2 or 3 years, there was an immediate kind of reaction. 1920, 21, but beyond that, it was not considered a major historical event, maybe until recently when we started to think about it again. So anyway, the future will tell us on that, but I agree with Robert. People love spectator sports, exhibits, concerts. I don't see that disappearing. Fourth thing on the list, social distancing will change the way that we think about public spaces like parks and playgrounds. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I really do not think it will impact the huge demand for parks and playgrounds. Parks are thought of as a safe space right now. Playgrounds have been closed, and I think we'll move back to those as soon as we can. But I think there will be some hand washing stations added, and I think parents will just carry their hand sanitizer for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was already a trend towards hygiene, especially with children and safety, particularly in public spaces. So I think that will definitely continue, maybe be a little more on people's minds. But yeah, I think people have actually rediscovered things like parks and playgrounds since they've been cooped up in their houses. So I think if anything, we might see a renaissance of those kind of things. Fifth thing on the list, COVID-19 will cause a deep change in the ways that we communicate in both profound and everyday ways, which is a pretty heavy question, but I think one that's worth asking.
Well, I think that there's been a long-term trend toward digital communication at all kinds, and I don't think that's going to abate. I think it's going to go forward, and we will get more sophisticated and use it more conveniently than we have before. But I don't think there's any substitute for face-to-face meetings and conversations and activities. It's just in our human nature, and I don't think that it's gonna affect that going forward.
Yeah, I think it may eliminate some unnecessary business travel, which might be a very positive thing. But yeah, I think if anything, like the previous point, it's made us realize the value of face-to-face contact in a lot of ways. And the last thing on this list, before we get a lot more specific, a lot more about the multifamily world. The virus will cause us to think differently about other crises that we will face in the long run and are really already facing, like climate change or equity. What do you guys think of that? I hope it's true.
Well, I think it is going to be true. I think that the debate publicly we've had about cooperation versus confrontation, the civic good versus the individual rights, those kinds of things have really brought a lot of focus to our concept of our society and how it operates. So I think that will carry on. I think, and I'm really hopeful that it will carry on. But I do think it will.
Yeah.
I think an important thing to note. I think an important thing to note is really just that this has helped us all see how fragile our system is.
Exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Exactly.
And David, as an aside, the one thing that we learned out of the 1918 pandemic was that the cities that cooperated internally and organized themselves better for distancing and sequestering were the cities that actually came out the quickest with the fewest infections and the fewest deaths. So it's nothing new that cooperation works.
Right. And we have some pretty big problems that we will be facing and trying to solve in the next few years after COVID-19. So I hope we're a little bit prepared for those. So really the heart of this presentation, we're going to talk specifically. We've kind of boiled it down to six pretty straightforward, simple, hopefully not revolutionary and not expensive ideas, but hopefully effective ones about how mixed-use developments can and will change after COVID-19. First of those is the idea that hands-free technology, which is already something that is begun and people are interested in and is well underway, will accelerate and dominate. Things like elevators, unit doors and security, thermostats, the idea of the smart home, the next evolution of the smart home. I think we're in version 2 or 3 now. So what will the next one be like? And things like online security. So what do you guys think? What are you seeing with hands-free technology in apartment units and apartment buildings?
I think this is the easy one, David, on your list. These trends are continuing, and really this has probably caused them to ramp up. All of the things that you mentioned, including Wi-Fi locks and any type of automation. So I think this is the easy one. These will just ramp up and continue.
Yeah, I would agree. I think again, a lot of these trends are already in effect, and things are already happening. And I think COVID-19 will really just cause those to continue and continue maybe at a increasing rate.
I think you may actually see a burst of low-hanging fruit in those technology areas as an immediate response to our crisis, our pandemic, because people in any business want to respond to what the public believes is a threat to them. So I think if they're inexpensive and easy to facilitate changes, you'll see them right away.
Absolutely, yeah.
Given that those are made to be retrofit products as much as they are for new build, we're not talking about whole-scale changes to any sort of infrastructure or right. kind of setups.
Yeah, yeah. And some of these are more common sense. Some of these will have more impact on what we do than others. The second one, though, home office and study spaces, is very big. It was very big before. It's probably bigger now since most of us, or a lot of us, are working from home. And a lot of this is really just smart design as opposed to anything particularly revolutionary. Acoustics, light and comfort, family and roommate isolation, which, is becoming maybe pet isolation as well, with the dogs barking in the background, becoming increasingly important. Do we have the right power for equipment, Do we have uninterrupted power sources for working at home like we do at work? Computer, printers, shredders, file storage. We have room for all that. Fast internet access is a given, and we'll talk more detail about that in a minute. Ergonomics, not only just of your office chair, but of the office itself, and how everything is reachable or not, and how you actually work in an office. The return of the old notion of live work and shared facilities, will that be a thing? Will your apartment building actually have a Zoom room? Will it have a place for limited conferencing, or will it have a business center that has some of these other things, that maybe the printers and the file storage? And then flexibility, because, you know, office space is expensive. That second bedroom that's an office is also expensive to rent and expensive to build. So can we successfully build an office that is also a second bedroom or a game room, or at least a place for guests to stay? So I know you guys are I know in particular, Robert, you've been looking at this. So what have you found out?
Well, this is an important one, David. This is one we're trying to be thoughtful about, and I know everyone is who has anything under design or construction right now. What we have talked about, and what I, you know, in canvassing friends and colleagues, really, you know, providing nooks and maybe providing desks, making sure that power outlets are in appropriate places so that you can easily convert some space within your unit into an office, but making that as easy as possible. And then part of that is reconfiguring some of the, potentially reconfiguring some of the amenity space into phone rooms and Zoom rooms so that you can get additional privacy elsewhere in the building.
Yeah, I think also that it's going to be interesting. You know, we've spent a lot of time in multifamily over the last few years whittling down the gross square footage of a unit. And I think that we'll be interested to see if we can actually accommodate some of these in-home type facilities successfully in that whittled down space, or does it require an additional square footage? And paired with that are these shared facilities. Is how much space are they going to take?
Yeah, I think those are all good points, and this is a huge thing, because I think we will go back to the office one day, but I think a lot of us will continue to work at home. So these are going to become important issues when someone is looking for an apartment to rent, a place to live. So the next thing is actually maybe a subset of the home office in many ways. Even better connections. Of course, high-speed service is with us now, and is pretty much a requirement for any place to live, particularly for apartments. Whether you provide multiple providers, give people a choice. Network bandwidth, is it enough? It's the Netflix hour. Do we all have sufficient bandwidth during the day as well as at night for entertainment? Location, geometry, signal strength, those kind of things. You know, the requirements of high-speed routers. And 5G, how much will that affect us in the future? Because it is coming, and it's coming soon. It is actually already here in some places.
I think that the key factor here is in multifamily is building in flexibility in the building shell, as well as the individual units and the routes to the units. The one consistent thing about all this is all these items is that they all change quickly. And so if you cannot easily and inexpensively adapt a multifamily structure to increases speed or different wire sizes or any of the things that we don't even know are going to happen yet, then you're gonna be sad about it. You need to be very flexible. That may mean building in some extra utility spaces, or something as simple as just larger conduits.
Yeah, I think that's something that we face in a lot of different kinds of buildings, but particularly in multifamily.
Yeah, this is critical. I think everybody's working with service providers just to make sure the bandwidth issue is not a problem. The only other thing I would mention is I know we're trying to be careful about making sure that Wi-Fi is available everywhere in every amenity space and every common space in the building, just so that people have the ability to work outside of the unit in as many places as they can.
Sure. It needs to be everywhere. I think at that point too, 5G could make a huge difference. We won't talk about that too much here, but if it's available and not as part of your building, but from the outside, what kind of difference does that make? It could really change things. And there are problematics there too with signal strength and other things, but probably save that for another webinar one day. So number 4, I think we've talked about this before. This is an especially, I think, important thing that will remain important after COVID. Something that was being thought about a lot before and even more now. And that's places for safe delivery, grocery delivery, restaurant delivery. Is it convenient, safe, and secure? How does that work? What location is it literally in the building? How does that work? How do you get groceries from your delivery area, if you have one, to your unit? And the news, I think last week, that Atlanta has been picked as I think the 4th city in the country for Amazon robot delivery. How will that impact us as well?
This one's just as important. I mean, we've had a lot of discussion surrounding this. I know everybody has, and people were talking about this before, just with the ramp up of grocery delivery and that sort of thing. And so currently we're working on changing the design of our lobby and amenity area to incorporate more storage and more cold storage. One thing that we've studied and tried to figure out how to accommodate is groceries, and I think generally most management companies are not providing space for large grocery deliveries. It's too complicated and it takes up too much space. And I think we'll see how that plays out over time. That's what's happening right now.
With a lot of, excuse me, with a lot of these things, it's a function of what the market's demanding, and that may be different for different buildings. You target market a large percentage of work from home people. Some of these amenities that we're talking about become more important than others. So it'll segment itself out.
Yeah. I think the future is really yet to be written with this. But if we only have half the volume of grocery delivery we have now, it will still be a significant driver of what folks are looking for, I think. So probably the most technical of all of these 6 points, what we're calling the super clean home, and the different systems that can aid in that, and some old-fashioned systems that are ways of doing things that could be offered as well. Some of the things that are out there, some things people have been talking about are UV ultraviolet systems that are antibacterial, antivirus. UVC is the hot new technology, and talk a little bit about that in a minute. UV integrated into HVAC systems. There are some problematics there with air exchanges and outside air volumes that haven't quite been thought through yet. And UV lights, which are used, for instance, to clean a subway car. But do you actually have these lights that are potentially dangerous? They do cause skin cancer and blindness. Do you leave that up to your residents to use unsupervised? Probably not. The next thing, ion systems or ionization systems that are part of HVAC systems, very promising, but yet to be tested. In a lot of cases, ASHRAE has no standard. There are no real standards or third-party verification. Simpler things like more efficient filtration, antibacterial and antivirus surfaces, which you see a lot in hospitals now. Will those become more commonplace in residential design? Just simply fresh air. Is that really probably one of the best solutions, and a very simple one to provide? And then the idea of concierge cleaning services, is that something that should be offered as a service and perhaps a source of income for the developer, for the building owner?
I think the market's going to drive this as well, frankly. the technologies for the air cleaning, the ions and UVs and whatnot, it's just a function of what people are going to demand. And of course, I think certain developers will opt to try it and see if it works and see if it draws more people. It may initially, it may over time not. Efficient filtration is always a good idea, as well as antibacterials. The issue of fresh air, frankly, is a function of how good your fresh air is from the outside. And so if you're in China somewhere, you probably don't want to open the windows. But if we have seen anything from this pandemic, we've noticed how much cleaner the air has gotten without all the commuting. So it may well be that fresh air gets a big boost. The concierge cleaning, I think, a paid-for amenity, maybe a profit center in the unit, in the development, but something that just has to be tried and see if it works.
Sure.
I agree, John. I think these systems, we've heard a lot of debate back and forth in terms of how useful they really are and how well they work. I think, it comes back to, I feel like these discussions come back to the good old fashioned operable window and just getting fresh air as much as you can. And then I agree with you on the concierge cleaning. I think that's I've heard more and more about that. And I think that's going to be a trend that will increase after this for sure.
Yeah, especially people working at home, they'll be too busy to do much cleaning themselves. So I think that could be a hot topic in the future. So our last point is about urban amenities and specifically about mixed use. What do you have downstairs? There's definitely a desire for grocery stores, and there are problematics to that too. Small neighborhood markets, drugstores, restaurants, but what kind of restaurants? And the service requirements for all that, the hours for all that. There's always a kind of a natural sort of conflict between the things the retail you're running and the residents above. Do they complain about noise, or do they complain that places aren't open later? Probably both. And then the unicorns, what everybody wants, but is hard to do. The local market, the hardware store, those kind of things. How do you keep those folks in business in the larger market? Your building is probably, unless you have a very large building, is probably not going to keep these places in business, by themselves. So how do you make sure these places are well run and will stay in business and stay as amenities?
Well, this is not a simple one. John and I have spent countless hours talking about this. I would add coffee shop to the unicorn. Everybody wants a coffee shop. Everybody wants a small market. But it has to be a business that not only caters to the tenants, but also to the neighborhood around it. And it's got to be a viable business that works. We've talked about, and we've had high-end restaurants in our buildings. Some have worked, some have not. And I think we've come to the conclusion in terms of restaurants that we would love something that's fun and affordable that tenants in the neighborhood can visit all the time and not feel like they're breaking the bank to come hang out there. And but really, I would highlight the fun aspect of that. I mean, something that people crave and want to come visit frequently. I mean, that's a huge benefit, and that's a tenant that will last and help out on the financial side of the business as well.
Couple of interesting points I think to make here. One is the degree to which you have to provide structured parking to support any of these retail activities. The cost of structured parking is astronomical. It depends on where you are, but $20,000 to $50,000 a space. And so you find it really difficult to make the economics work if you have to really park the thing to some of the zoning code requirements that are out there. The other thing to think about, and so what that means though in real time is that you've got to worry more and focus more on the area you're in, the submarket you're in, and the density of the living spaces and the people that can walk to places like this rather than the ones who have to drive there. So it may, in fact, drive us to more cooperation among developers to create larger geographic areas with more people and higher density to support some of these things, because all of our tenants want these things. The one thing that you could look at is other older cities and see what has worked traditionally in those. And what works traditionally almost everywhere is the corner bar. And, you know, you can make that a little restaurant, diner, but the corner bar is very popular. And you have to have the right characters operating it and working there. But it's very popular, and I'd like to see more of those.
That's exactly what I would have expected you to say, John. Thank you.
I'm Irish.
But those are all great points. And, you know, I think, you know, do you have an expense account restaurant that's very prestigious, and, you know, maybe the people in your building might be able to go there once a year, you know, on a special event, or do you have a place that they like hanging out all the time? You know, I think all of this is about, you know, providing amenity to your tenants. And, you know, I want to live in the building with that restaurant or that store. So yeah, I think this is very important and a good way to look at it. So that is really all we have today in terms of mixed-use development, residential development after COVID-19, and hopefully we've had you know, some good discussions about these things. You know, we don't know what will happen. We don't even know when this crisis will be over. Hopefully soon, but the future will tell us a lot. And it's hard to predict, as I mentioned before. A single event, discovery technology may change everything that we've talked about. But the smart developer, the smart architect is always thinking ahead and trying to stay ahead of trends to be more competitive than the competition. And I think that's why we're here today, and that's the discussion we've had. So thank you. And I just want to remind everybody that this is the second part of a three-part series. These will all be available on our website, being recorded and not live, but just as good. And our next live presentation is on August 25th, and it'll be about finding the right mixed-use project. And we hope to have a few folks maybe from Urban Realty on that one as well. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it back over to Gary.
Thanks, David. And we will take a couple of questions that we received during the presentation today and start with those now. The first of those is, how do you go about making your decision on cost versus reward for any of these post-COVID features?
I think it sort of boils down to the development organization's method of doing business. Large companies doing large projects in perhaps multiple markets will generally always, and they have the money to generally always opt for sort of sophisticated market research to try to give them some direction and cover, frankly, on these things. I think on the opposite end of the scale, the really small developers will try a few easy and inexpensive things to see what sticks. And those of us in the great middle will see what works and follow the trends.
That makes sense, and thank you for sharing that. The other question we've received so far is in regard to home offices. Do you see the pandemic introducing a new unit type, like the live-work unit, or are these needs addressed through amenities and flexibility within the two-bedroom unit?
I think the adaptation of the existing unit structures is probably the way to go. As fast as this thing came on us that's requiring so much work from home could easily go away again. I don't think working from home is going to go away anytime soon. But if you're going to provide a discrete workspace like a second bedroom, you have to remember that may also be a second bedroom. So
Yep.
either now or in the future. So you can't shortchange the design of it in order just to get a little square footage extra.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John. And and your point earlier was very well taken, that we have spent years trying to make units as efficient as we can and really as small as we can, and still be very functional and work well. And I think when we did the George together, I think the average unit size there, including 1 and 2 bedrooms, is 660 square feet, which is pretty small. And I think that they're very they're viewed as very desirable units, and the building isn't really 100% leased. So I think we've been very successful there, but does that work for home offices? I think it's another design problem. I think we have to see, in a 1-bedroom apartment, do we have a niche or a specific area that works as a home office? Do we have shared facilities for printers and maybe Zoom calls that are downstairs? And if we have a 2-bedroom, is that second bedroom really viable as an office? All the things that we discussed earlier, that those work that way. And can it also be a second bedroom when you're not using it as an office? So flexibility is really key to that. And real estate square footage is expensive to build and expensive to rent. So I think it's incumbent upon us to design it well and to figure out those kinds of efficiencies to make it work.
I think the other thing to be aware of, frankly, is once the pandemic passes and we're back to relatively life as normal, not only will you have a certain percentage of people who start going back to the office on a regular basis. We don't know what percentage that'll be now, but it'll be some. But secondly, you're going to have the social restrictions lifted. In other words, right now it's very difficult for a person working at home to go to a shared common space because of the social distancing requirements and the fear of infection. So I think that once those come off, we'll have to see if the trend leads toward larger and more office-friendly kind of spaces in the units, or merely just a little bit better home office kind of detailing facilities. And then they would still go to more common spaces for maybe group meetings or whatever.
That makes sense. We've also received a question here about parking. And the question is there a possibility in the future that municipalities revisit their requirements for parking spaces? As you mentioned, the cost for parking, especially structured, is a huge factor in project viability. Do you see a trend towards some of the characteristics of older cities where not everyone owns a vehicle? And David, if you can start with that question. I know that this is something that you guys are often discussing at the Beltline Review meetings, and something that is of particular concern for developments along the Beltline. And then maybe if you can follow up.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. This subject comes up a lot. Those of us and the folks advocates, urban advocates, who are trying to make a city that is more pedestrian and less automobile oriented, wish that parking requirements were less than they are. And in many parts of the city, they actually are. Some parts of SBI districts, other parts of Midtown and other places actually have no parking requirements. They may have a maximum. So that's already happening. And I think we have some good leadership in Atlanta, in particular at City Hall, that recognizes that we have to stop being, so drastically overparked. I think in working with Central Atlanta Progress over the years, I know that one statistic that is really shocking to people is that there are something like 90,000 parking spaces downtown. And when folks come into our offices, I couldn't find a parking space. There's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance there. That maybe they're not convenient or visible, but we have so many surface lots that just destroy the kind of urbanity and the pedestrianism of a place. And we need to live in some kind of balance, and we need to live. If we don't live where we work in the home office, we need to live close to where we work. And I think that's definitely a trend. And I think the regulatory authorities, especially in the centers of cities, have recognized that. And I think that is changing. It needs to change more completely and probably faster. So, John, I know this is something that you and I have talked about a lot. Remaking cities as pedestrian places.
Yeah, a couple of things here. One is, I think there needs to be a genuine public education process that ought to be led, frankly, by developers and designers and urban planners, as opposed to politicians who can explain to people the relationship between density and things like parking and access to facilities they want. And there is a direct relationship between the number of people and units living, as we said earlier, in a stub area, and the ability to walk to those amenities. So they have frequently not understood that, and they don't understand it because you see a lot of NIMBY stuff still going around, and people even object to 3 and 4 and 5-story buildings in their neighborhoods. That's got to change. The second thing that I've been sort of fantasizing on for a number of years here is, what do you do with all these garage structures that we have when the demand for parking decreases? Won't go away, but decreases. And I think what that means from a design development standpoint is you got to figure out some ways, either to make it a loss leader to tear that thing down, or frankly, figure out a way to rehab it into some useful space. For instance, a 3-tray garage with a center ramp that communicates to all the levels could easily be retrofitted to remove the center ramp, and you'd have a donut building with basically 60-foot depths, which is almost ideal for multifamily and for office, frankly. So those kinds of things ought to be planned in. They ought to be baked into the plans, as well as the whole urban planning and density thing.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And I guess the day one considerations on the future use of those garages are things like head heights and design loads, which obviously would be different as the use changes, but maybe can be anticipated, incorporated into the original design.
Exactly. I've talked to some of the precast manufacturers who actually do all these designs, and those items are essential. Also, vibration and whatnot, which are more sensitive in these other facilities than they are in parking structures.
That makes sense. And kind of the follow-up to that question then, John, is in the same way that you were describing and Robert was discussing the cooperation amongst developers to look at a larger geographic area in terms of ground floor retail, and making sure that that's beneficial to the overall community and is sustainable in that way from a business sense as well. It is the parking structure that we still need today that maybe is it in decreasing use in the future? Is that another area that we could see cooperation amongst developers on? I know that.
Yeah, I think that we could see carefully located common parking structures, which are actually perhaps financed and developed through a municipal authority of some kind, to remove the burden, the financial burden, or to move the financial burden from the developer to more the general public, which actually uses them. And you can do that through validation of parking tickets and that sort of thing, or just having a small fee, and given the ability of municipalities to finance those kinds of things at much more economical rates than we can, then that makes all the sense in the world to include them in that sort of planning. The problem is you can't locate a mega parking deck that is really inaccessible to the kinds of amenities we're talking about. They have to be accessible. And I think a city that's done a really good job with that is Charleston, where they have a very large downtown parking structure, but they also have a very efficient and convenient micro bus system that moves people through the downtown. So you don't have to walk a mile or two to get to something you want to see.
Yeah, and John, those are all great points. And I was actually going to point out that for some reason, Atlanta has been resistant to the notion of municipal parking, and I don't actually know why. I don't know the politics behind it, or maybe the parking companies don't like that. I don't know. But I was going to point out Charleston as well. I'm from there, I grew up there, and I know even when I was a kid, they started building municipal decks. And to your point, they're actually small structures that fit into the urban fabric, and they're in many different locations, and with retail, and they have been for years, and they work exceptionally well. Charleston, of course, is very walkable and very compact. It's not really that big, but with the kind of shuttle system you're talking about, this could really work well, take a burden away from developers, make a more urban, walkable place, and let developers spend money on making better units and better retail. So I don't know why it hasn't caught on. Maybe we should have some politicians or city planners on our webinars and ask them that. Maybe that's something we could do in the future. Actually, I like that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great discussion to have. So the last question we have time to answer today, and then we're glad to follow up by email on any further discussion on some of these other points. In the past year, there has been an interest in co-housing or shared housing as a new housing type and or affordable housing solution. Has that conversation waned due to COVID, or are there still projects being contemplated that utilize a roommate sort of layout and scenario?
I don't think it's waned. I think the COVID has put it on the back burner just because it's so difficult to visualize how that will work. I don't think it's waned though, and I think it'll be increasing in the future. I think that, again, it's a matter of market segmentation and finding out which cohorts of the population demand that and need that. For instance, young mothers, single mothers with children, co-housing and shared facilities are a great resource for them because of all their needs for childcare and whatnot. So it'll be just a function of going forward. But I think once the COVID is passed, yeah, it'll be back.
Yeah, and I think it's a great trend. It's been happening in denser, frankly, much more expensive cities for a while, and as Atlanta becomes unfortunately more expensive, it's happening here. But something we haven't talked too much about is the notion of equity, and I think these kinds of ideas are a way that the city and all of its amenities and its desirability can be made available to a wider variety of income levels and folks. And so I think they're actually great ideas. Not everybody wants to live in a situation, with 4 or 5 roommates, certainly. And there are other solutions as well, micro or at least small housing, single family housing developments with houses that are basically the size of what we used to build or even smaller are another solution there. But it's the notion of equity, the notion of affordability is absolutely crucial. And we're involved in some affordable housing along Memorial Drive, and it's becoming more and more critical in Atlanta and the region, and it is something that we really need to spend time with and come up with some viable and creative solutions, which co-housing may certainly be one of those.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you so much for joining John, and to Robert also, who had to drop off. We hope everyone will join us on August the 25th for the 3rd and final webinar within this series on finding the right mixed-use project, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.